This is who the Prime Minister has made the poster boy for NIMBYs and blockers. Attacked personally by the PM in a national newspaper for, he says, squandering tens of millions of taxpayers' money. Campaigners like him are who Keir Starmer wants to put on notice.
We'll send a very clear message to the NIMBYs, the blockers, the alliance of naysayers. Well, we say to them, you no longer have the upper hand.
The Teesworks industrial zone on this stretch of North Sea coastline is the latest front in that fight. Planned site of a huge new gas power station intended to be the world's first to use carbon capture, which developers say will make it net zero by sucking the emissions and storing them under the sea. But a single individual, a computer scientist from Norfolk, has stalled this entire project by challenging it repeatedly in the courts on environmental grounds. This week, Andrew Boswell is in court again for the final round. He's certain that his cause is a just one.
People will be very surprised to hear that they're going to build a gas-fired power station here. They are going to put carbon capture and storage on it. But our analysis is that that actually is not a good solution environmentally.
You have lost every case to date, racking up bills for the taxpayer and delaying projects. Can you understand why some people are frustrated at that?
The point is that we have laws in this country and we have a Climate Change Act, so we are holding the government to account.
The Prime Minister's come after you personally for what you've been doing. How do you feel about that?
Well, of course, that hasn't been pleasant. But if you're an environmentalist, you have to take on strong forces, and there's very strong forces behind this.
This is just the latest case Mr. Boswell has brought, all made possible because of an international convention that means if he loses, it's the taxpayer who has to pick up almost all of the other side's legal costs, potentially millions of pounds. That convention is intended to give citizens without deep pockets the power to take on businesses and government.
Can you give us a scale of the number of people who do what you do and use the courts to try and ensure what you would say is getting environmental justice?
I think there's probably 20 or 30 players. Some are individual like me, and others are groups like Friends of the Earth, Client Earth, Good Law Project, and so on.
What would happen if the costs that you had to pay weren't capped?
It would be very difficult for individual campaigners like myself and also the environmental groups and other groups who wish to go to court.
Teesworks is already the biggest industrial zone in the country, 4,500 acres of activity. One area is empty and quiet. This is where the new power station is meant to be. For now, a standstill.
There should be hundreds of jobs already on this site, gearing up to thousands of jobs. But the second consequence, actually, to the businesses wanting to invest, is that this delay has already cost tens and tens and tens of millions of pounds. It's huge delays. It could mean that the project doesn't go ahead at all.
This is a fossil fuel project due to open 2 years before the government's 2030 promise that 100% of our electricity demand will come from clean power sources. Green promises, many enshrined in law, an obvious target for activists.
This is the consequence of a system that caps the costs for people bringing challenges to projects like this. Can that continue?
The system has gone so far one way, it needs a rebalance. There are too many challenges. We can't get things done in this country. We need to be able to get on and do those things. The system doesn't allow it. There needs to be fundamental reform, and we need to stop these activists from being able to stop any sort of economic growth.
I understand that the cost to developers of the delay amounts to £100 million every 3 months. And this, just one example of dozens of challenges around the country. A headache for developers and politicians alike. The starting point, a place 500 miles away that you may never have heard of.
Aarhus, Denmark's second city. A popular cruise destination celebrated for its coastline and its architecture, and the birthplace of the international treaty, which some in government believe is tying Britain's dash for growth in knots. It's the reason legal costs for activists like Andrew Boswell are capped as low as £5,000, with taxpayers covering the rest. The legal firm representing him clear that it's vital for all cases like this.
Well, claimants like Andrew are using a whole variety of different environmental laws to bring their cases. One of the laws they are going to be using a lot, pretty much universally, is something called the Aarhus Convention, which is a fairly technical piece of law, but something which is extremely important to every claimant who's bringing an environmental case in this country.
Now, you work for a leading law firm in this area. Can you just give me a sense of the scale of projects that are being challenged?
We're talking about 80 cases a year presently being brought on environmental issues in the High Court, and that doesn't sound like very many, but they are actually mostly very important projects of huge significance. They are cases that are not massive in number, but have enormous implications for the protection of the environment.
Inside Downing Street, they label the practice lawfare, a derogatory term meaning the strategic use of the legal system to damage an opponent. And I understand they want to stop taxpayers from subsidising it.
We're talking about tens of millions of pounds of taxpayers' money effectively going to lawyers in fighting these cases that end up delaying big infrastructure projects for years.
The very simple point is if those projects were made lawfully, if the decisions were lawful behind them, there would be no issue. There would be no challenge, the challenge would fail, and the money would not be paid. So I think the key point is to make sure that the government is making the decisions in a lawful manner.
It's empty sites like this where work is on hold for endless court cases that really gets the Prime Minister exercised, I'm told. But disarming the activists he calls blockers may mean breaking an international treaty. Is he really willing to have that fight? Sam Coates, Sky News, Teesside.